Le dernier épisode, je savais pas comment l'appeler. Je l'ai appelé les filtres. Ça a l'air de marcher. Je vais t'envoyer juste mon dis-moi si toi tu vois aussi. C'est juste moi parce que je suis connecté dans le compte. Je vais t'envoyer ça. Si t'as reçu quelque chose, ça veut dire que ça marche.
Ben, j'ai reçu un lien, ouais.
Si tu peux rentrer sur le site. Peut-être ça a juste pris du temps avant de loader. Là.
65e épisode, ouais, je vois tous les épisodes.
Ah ouais, parfait. Ben, on est on.
On n'a pas
Ah
encore
ben,
de
ça
review.
marche.
Attends, je vais review. Ah non, j'ai pas de compte. Fuck. Je peux pas review.
Y'a pas de review.
Je peux pas review. J'ai pas de compte.
J'ai mis que c'est un comedy show.
Ah, ok.
Je sais pas, là.
C'est clean.
Les catégories sont pas claires. Là.
C'est bien comédie.
Ouais, ça marche. Ça.
Ben, si t'écoutes ça pour l'humour, genre honnêtement, t'es quand même à bonne place. Hein.
Ben, d'habitude, je mets trois catégories. Il y avait une place où j'avais mis comédie. Je pense que c'était société, culture, puis arts, ou quelque chose de même. C'est pas mal ça, le truc qu'on parle, à peu près. Mais tu sais, on parle un peu de tout, là. On n'est pas tant
Y a
limité.
pas
Là.
tant de sujets, non. Chaque fois, le monde nous pose la question, genre, c'est quoi le sujet? Puis c'est comme, lol. Quel fucking sujet, man? That's the question. Oh,
Non, il
c'est
n'y a
en
pas de
live.
sujet vraiment.
Copier-coller
Live
link.
up.
Je t'envoie ça.
L'épisode d'aujourd'hui que je viens de poster, il y a déjà 8 downloads.
Wouh! Il y a du monde qui l'ont set en automatique download, mon cher.
Alors, il y a du monde qui l'ont get déjà. Là. C'est
Mais tu
super
disais que c'était
fin.
pas un de nos meilleurs. Tu disais que c'était ça, c'était pas un de nos meilleurs.
Bah, tu sais, je l'ai vraiment pas écouté au complet. Genre, j'ai juste comme passé à travers vite, là. Mais je trouvais qu'il y avait beaucoup de moments de dead air quand même.
Ouais, ça arrive.
Où on checkait de quoi, genre, puis on était juste comme. C'était pas tant. Des fois, c'est plus énergique. Des fois, on est plus. Des fois, il y a plus d'énergie. J'avais l'impression qu'on était un petit peu plus slow que des fois.
Ouais, c'est ça. Ben là, le setup, il était vraiment bon la dernière fois. Le fait que j'ai deux laptops, ça me permettait de checker de quoi en même temps de recorder, là. C'était vraiment pas pire.
Mais comme hier, je trouvais que c'était beaucoup mieux. Genre, hier, je trouvais que. Tu sais, j'ai pas écouté l'UDR, là, mais je
Non,
trouvais
mais je
qu'on
te
avait dit des
confirme, il
bons
était beaucoup
trucs.
mieux, ouais.
On est dans un meilleur flow, là, je sais pas. Après une pause, le premier, il est toujours un petit peu comme. Faut se remettre dedans un peu, là.
Ben ouais, c'est ça l'affaire aussi, là. C'est comme. C'est en bûchant qu'on devient bûcheron.
Euh, testing live. Ah, puis c'est ça. Je le vois en live. Nice, nice. Ben, good stuff. OBS, ça va être bon. Ça, c'est justement que OBS, ça devrait être une bonne solution.
En plus, on peut juste l'enregistrer
Puis,
localement avec OBS. Puis où on peut le streamer.
Hello. Communicate in
ouais, en
English.
plus, donc, faudrait quand même pouvoir record l'audio là, pour pouvoir le post. Là.
Moi, mon plan, là, c'était de streamer direct. OK? Puis là, on peut le refetch, le file, en downloadant le file off YouTube.
Wonderbroad Fractal Zoom, qu'est-ce que tu fais?
Tu mets de quoi pour le monde qui puisse regarder?
Ah, ok, tu mets un petit background.
Ouais, je mets un petit background.
Nice.
C'est une
Ah ouais, tu
visual
disais, hein?
experience. There's 2 hours of visual experience right there.
2 hours of visuals. De temps en temps, mais c'est bon un stream comme ça parce qu'on peut aussi montrer des choses. C'est quand même pratique.
Ouais, c'est ça, exact. Puis là, quand tu vas le downloader, tu vas avoir le full feed. Fait que tu peux stripper le vidéo que tu n'auras pas de besoin pour les podcasts, mais tu peux garder le vidéo aussi pour le reposter sur YouTube. Là.
Yeah.
Si tu veux être low-key à Bandit, on peut le streamer avec ma chaîne, puis le re-input dans Air Illégal quand il est fini. Là.
On pourrait, ou on le stream direct sur Air Illégal aussi.
Ouais,
Hein.
moi je serais down de streamer
Vu que
direct
c'est
sur Air Illégal. Il me faut juste la stream key, là, puis on peut faire ça.
Ça aurait plus de sens vu que c'est ça la chaîne. Si tu sais, on peut le faire sur le tien aussi, là, ça me dérange pas. Là, mais...
Ben non,
Faut
c'est
que je
ça.
t'envoie tout.
Tu veux-tu m'envoyer la stream key de Air Illégal, comme ça je peux setuper ça?
Ok, ouais, je vais checker comment ça marche.
Attends, check l'écran là, du stream. Tu vois le bouton ici, créer?
Attends une seconde, parce que ça, c'est un petit délai avec le live en
Ah,
ce
pas
moment.
trop,
Donc,
là,
ok, moi,
Tu vois le bouton créer, là?
ça a comme bugué, là, pour vrai, je vois.
Ouais, ça donne-lui son temps, là.
L'écran est juste bleu du stream live.
Le blitz. Ah, moi, je
Comme les
vois encore.
fractals, ils l'ont peut-être buggé.
Ah, ok, je vois ce que tu veux dire. Erreur, YouTube ne reçoit suffisamment pas. Hmm.
Checker ça.
T'as raison, le Fractals, il a bugué. Je pense que c'est parce que j'ai fermé mon capot puis j'ai réouvert mon capot. Fait que je vais arrêter le. Oh! Je pense que je l'ai là.
Ah, faut que tu fasses trop de manipulation.
C'est ça qui se passe.
Ok, ouais, là, ça a sorti.
Là, tu le vois?
Ben là, je vois juste, ouais, je vois l'écran avec les fractals.
Tu vois le bouton créer.
Donc, ouais, je sais, c'est où, ouais, button create.
Tu fais passer au direct. Quand tu fais passer au
Go
direct,
live?
tu as une clé de flux. La clé de flux, c'est
Ok.
de ça qu'on a besoin pour streamer.
Clé de flux, d'accord. En anglais, j'imagine c'est genre flux key ou quelque chose.
Ouais, ouais.
Only 24 hours until you can stream. You requested streaming access on October 8th at 6:48.
Ah, tu
Once
viens de
it's
request.
available. Bella, what the fuck?
Fait que tu peux pas streamer la première journée où tu essaies de streamer. Fait que voilà, that's it, c'est setupé. On va pouvoir streamer la semaine prochaine. Nice.
C'est ça, t'as fait.
Hey, on a
Ouais,
bien
c'est
fait
bon,
d'essayer,
d'accord.
Calis.
Ouais, au moins c'est prêt pour le next time. Mais en
C'est
plus,
ça.
on a déjà stream, mais pas ce genre de stream là.
Bon, on
Ok,
a pas
d'accord.
stream sur Air Illégal, then.
Non, techniquement, on a stream, mais c'est une autre sorte de stream. C'était en Premiere. C'était pas un stream techniquement, c'était juste que c'était en direct. Une Premiere, genre, tu sais.
Ah, ok, ok.
Tu sais, quand je le poste, tu te souviens, des fois, je le poste, puis comme c'est en Premiere avant, là, c'est comme si ça serait en direct.
Ah, ouais, ok, c'est un faux
Mais c'est
direct.
pas vraiment en direct. Ouais, c'est comme un faux direct. C'est pour ça que ça a pas marché avec ça. Mais bon, c'est pas grave, là.
Bon, ben c'est bon à
Mais
savoir en tout cas. On est setupé, là.
faut que je t'envoie tous les emails, puis tous les mots de passe de tous les comptes qu'on a. Parce qu'on commence à avoir beaucoup de comptes. Genre, le podcast a beaucoup de comptes, là. Le YouTube, le Twitter, le Apple, toutes les affaires, là, le Spotify. Le truc avec le YouTube, c'est que c'est le YouTube que moi j'utilise, genre, juste, c'est comme mon YouTube personnel que j'utilise chez nous, genre, quand
Ouais,
j'écoute
ouais.
des affaires.
Normal.
Alors, peut-être, peut-être l'historique, des fois, il y a des affaires ridicules dedans, là.
Ouais, mais on
Mais il
s'en
n'est pas
fout, là.
accessible publiquement, je pense.
Ok, ok.
C'est ça. Ouais, ouais.
Bon, ben petit setup.
Alors, finalement, ça marche. On est sur Apple, on est là-dessus. On est même sur Amazon.
On devrait être sur Amazon.
On est sur Amazon.
Ah, on est sur Amazon.
Amazon Music. C'est quelque chose Audible, quelque chose de même. Amazon. C'est quoi ces sons-là?
Quels sont? Comme des sacs plastiques?
Ouais, genre des sons spéciaux.
Ah, c'est moi qui déplace les sacs plastiques. Désolé.
Amazon Music. Mais je sais pas comment ça marche vraiment Amazon Music pour vrai. Je sais qu'on est dessus, mais je sais pas vraiment comment voir le truc. Je pense qu'il faut que t'aies un compte Amazon.
Ouais, c'est sûr, là. T'as pas de compte Amazon, mais on est sur Amazon. Ah,
Oh
ok,
oui, j'ai un
d'accord.
compte Amazon.
Ok, bah c'est ça.
Je suis juste pas connecté en ce moment. C'est vrai, j'utilise Amazon.
Ouais.
Ah non, tu vois, ok, j'ai trouvé. Amazon Music. Tu peux quand même rentrer sur Amazon Music sans compte. C'est ça que je trouvais bizarre parce que. C'est comme Spotify, tu peux rentrer sur le site sans compte, là. Ok, Air Illégal Podcast. Ah, nice. Ah, ouais. Ouais, tu vois. Je vais te l'envoyer. Je t'ai envoyé un micro en haut.
Ouais, tu m'as envoyé le USB Yeti.
Ça, c'est un micro que je me suis fait recommander. Apparemment, il est bon. Mais il est genre 130$, là. Ce qui est quand même faisable, là. Mais on verra, là. C'est peut-être pas, on verra.
On en reparlera quand j'aurai 130$. Lol. J'ai clairement 130$, là. Mais, ouais. J'ai vu des podcasts, gros, jusqu'à genre un bon chiffre, là. Avant d'avoir du gear.
Ouais, on n'est pas obligé, là. C'est juste que.
Je parle entièrement sur le dos de juste du bon content. Parce que du bon content, c'est pas le gear.
Je t'ai envoyé le lien Amazon aussi, là. Mais c'est pas mal la même affaire que tous les autres, là. Tu sais, c'est juste une liste des épisodes, là.
On en avait un assis de condenseur quelque part. On avait un actual micro condenseur, là. Un actual setup. On en avait qu'un seul, là.
Ben, un jour, on aura notre studio, là, si tout va bien, puis on aura une petite console, puis des micros, là, puis... C'est pas besoin d'un gros setup, là, mais... C'est un petit truc chill, là.
Ouais, mais c'est sûr, c'est comme. Ça serait. C'est pour ça que le monde, ils upgrade leur gear au final. C'est que genre, si ton podcast, il fait comme 1000$ par mois, puis que si t'as
C'est ça,
pas
ça vaut la
upgrade le
peine.
gear encore, ça fait comme pas de sens, là, t'sais.
Non, non, c'est ça, mais si tu fais rien, c'est comme...
Si tu fais rien, ça fait pas de sens de upgrade le gear, mais tout le monde le fait. C'est ça que je comprends pas.
Ouais, ça va.
Moi, je veux le production quality dans un studio Hollywood. Genre des petits films de merde, ok? Ils vont get une caméra genre 4K, genre. C'est comme, bro, filme ça avec ton téléphone cellulaire, man. For real.
Ouais, au cégep, on avait des caméras qui pourraient filmer 4K, mais genre, il y avait aucun écran qui pouvait, comme, le jouer en 4K, genre.
C'est ça, c'est grave, là.
Parce que moi, c'est de point, rendu là. Puis personne pouvait personne n'utilisait l'option 4K parce que c'est trop powerful, genre. C'était pas nécessaire, ça avait des trop gros fichiers, genre.
Mais c'est ça, c'est juste.
Euh,
C'est overkill, là. Le gear, il est overkill pour la tâche à la
Si
maison.
si tu fais vraiment quelque chose de haut de gamme, ok, là, tu sais, tu fais c'est une pub pour Lacoste ou quelque
Mais
chose,
c'est ça,
d'accord, là,
le
je peux
gars qui fait
comprendre.
des top plans de pub, mettons, puis que là, il a déjà des gros contrats, ben là, ça ferait pas de sens de pas upgrader le gear. Ça ferait pas de sens de faire une super belle pub pour une grosse brand avec genre en fond. Tu sais. Ça ferait pas de sens.
Ah, c'est ça.
Mais là, c'est la même affaire, ça fait fucking pas de sens de faire ça comme ça, là. À l'inverse. Mais là, somehow, pour le monde, ça fait plus de sens. J'ai l'impression que souvent, pour le monde, ça fait plus de sens parce que d'une certaine façon, il y a du cash à dépenser qu'il faut qu'il soit dépensé. Either way, genre. Puis il est synké sur les caméras. Genre, ma blonde, elle travaillait à un moment donné pour aider les itinérants, là. Puis
Ouais.
il y a une affaire qu'ils avaient à faire pour le job, qui était que genre, le boss, fallait qu'il guette une nouvelle. Genre, ils allaient ouvrir un genre de café pour vendre genre des goods pour faire des levées de fonds, mettons, ok? Mais là, le
Ouais.
boss, il va acheter une machine à café, tu sais, pour le café, genre. Puis là, ben, il faut une bonne machine à café, là, pour qu'il puisse en faire plein, là, avec. Puis des cafés de qualité, puis tout. Mais comme, tu sais, d'occasion, une bonne machine, ça coûte peut-être 500, 600 piastres, genre. Lui, il s'en va pas acheter la machine à 500, 600 piastres. Lui, il s'en va acheter la brand new machine pour 5000.
Ouais, il niaise pas.
Puis la raison pour laquelle il fallait qu'il achète la brand new machine pour 5000, c'est que il restait genre à peu près 5000 dans le budget annuel qui n'était pas encore alloué. Puis il fallait l'utiliser cet argent-là parce que si tu l'utilises pas, ben tu le refais pas donner l'année prochaine.
Ouais, c'est ça.
Fait qu'il fallait dépenser le cash, fait qu'il l'a dépensé. That's it. Est-ce que ça fait du meilleur café? Probablement pas, non. Probablement ça fait le même café que si t'avais dépensé 600$.
Ouais, pis c'est peut-être mieux, là. Tu sais, je sais pas, là. Tu sais, il y a quand même une différence entre. C'est comme au travail, on a du café filtre, puis il y a des cafés en avant, genre du bistrot, que c'est comme une machine, puis tout, là, c'est
Ouais, mais
fucking
c'est ça. Moi, je
spécial.
parle de cette machine-là. Je te parle pas de remplacer cette machine-là par du café filtre. Je parle d'acheter une machine comme ça, d'occasion, au lieu de l'acheter neuve.
Non, non, c'est ça, c'est ça.
Fait que ça
Non,
revient au
c'est ça.
même, là. Peut-être pas acheter la plus haut de gamme non plus, là, tu sais, puis juste acheter une qui fait la job, tu sais. Comme quelqu'un qui run une business puis qui a pas un fini cash, tu sais.
Ouais, c'est un fort infini cash, c'est juste Mr. Beast, là, qui a ça, là.
Mais tu sais, comme on disait tantôt, c'est comme. Puis là, si tu commences à faire genre fucking Affini Café, puis t'es comme le meilleur café in town, puis tu fais des assis de beau latte, puis tout le kit, puis ça rapporte des 10 000 par année, juste ton café, ben là, upgrade la machine, c'est arrivé là.
Ouais, c'est sûr.
Toute l'équation est upside down, là.
L'équation est upside. Il me reste encore 3 étapes. Créer votre première publication. Expliquer à vos fans que c'est accessible à tout le monde. Les publications publiques sont davantage partagées. C'est ça, il va rester juste à setup le Patreon, là.
Ah oui, t'as pas encore setupé le Patreon, hein? J'étais déjà en train de le plugger hier, mais il est pas setup.
Ben, il est setup, mais faut juste finir de le. Genre, ils veulent que genre, je fasse un premier post, ils veulent que je fasse une photo de profil, des petits trucs dans le même. Tu sais, le compte est fait, là.
Ah, ok, ok.
Mais ils
Ouais,
veulent
faut
que je
juste
fasse des petits
setup, là.
trucs.
J'en ai un pour Mail Industries, là. Je pense pas que je l'ai jamais utilisé.
Ah ouais, t'en as fait un?
Ouais, ouais.
Créer votre première publication publique. Ça, c'est comment je fais ça, une publication publique?
Publication, c'est public. Tu peux pas faire une publication privée parce que c'est pas une publication,
C'est logique, ça, hein, faut, hein?
right? Il est écrit dans le fucking mot. Herder. Herder. Une publication privée.
Une publication publique. Créer une publication d'image. Ajouter un titre. Raconter une histoire. Ok, il y a des limites là. Je commencer à raconter des histoires.
Raconter une histoire. Oh oui, tu devrais raconter une histoire qui est comme ultra tangentielle, là, qui a tellement pas rapport.
Il pense vraiment que j'ai comme rien à faire là. Attends, ça supprimer, ajouter des légendes.
J'ai rien à faire pour l'écrire l'histoire. Je me rappelle, moi, quand je l'ai setup, ça a pris du temps aussi. Hein.
Ça prend du temps pareil, hein.
Ouais, setuper toutes les affaires digitales, là, ça prend un temps fou, puis ça rapporte rien. C'est crazy.
Ben, tu sais, ça rapporte peut-être sur le long terme, là, mais c'est vrai que.
Mais ce que je veux dire, c'est que sur le moment présent, ça coûte un temps fou, là. Ça fait rien, là. C'est comme, ouais, effectivement, il faut le setup. C'est le whole concept, c'est que ça coûte du temps pour le setuper, puis qu'il faut le faire pour que ça soit. C'est comme faire un site web. C'est comme faire un site web, c'est juste une perte de temps là, sur le short term, mais sur le long term, ben là, après ton site web, tu peux le linker, puis tout le kit, mais là, c'est encore plus une perte de temps sur le long terme, parce que Chris, là, faut updater le contenu qui est dessus, puis l'éditer, puis tout le kit.
J'arrive pas à confirmer mon email adresse. Je sais pas pourquoi c'est compliqué de même, là. Ça fait genre 3 fois que je le fais, là. Entrer une province de résidence valide. Mais ils vont venir chez nous. Quand quelque chose va pull up, ils vont venir chez nous, là.
Pourquoi il viendrait chez vous? What the fuck?
Mon adresse est partout, là, avec le podcast. Quelqu'un hack le podcast, là, ils vont pull up.
Quelqu'un hack le podcast, il va pas là.
Notification, devenir créateur. Ok, ben on est good, là. Je suis tanné d'écrire des trucs.
Non, faut que tu continues d'écrire des
On
trucs.
peut, on peut-tu publier le truc, l'affaire, là?
Nope. Non.
Publier votre page, il reste quoi?
Ah, simplement, une fois que t'as fait tout ça, fais juste rentrer ton numéro de carte de crédit. C'est comme ça
Maintenant,
que
c'est
tu
comme,
publies.
après, t'as fait tout ça, écris ton nom complet, ton nom puis ton prénom. C'est comme, ah, yo, c'est quoi le rapport, là?
Ah, pour
Elle
vrai?
ne sera jamais visible. Mais pourquoi t'en as besoin?
C'est probablement parce qu'ils vont t'envoyer de l'argent. Fait que vu qu'ils t'envoient de l'argent, ils ont besoin de toutes les infos sur toi.
Votre page est en cours d'examen, voir ma
Puis pour
page.
payer des taxes. C'est super important.
Ben, c'est pour ça aussi sur Twitter, c'était long, parce que sur Apple, ça c'était long, parce qu'il y a un truc de paiement.
Ah, va falloir que tu payes des taxes.
Pour avoir la page, genre. Aussi, moi, je reçois de l'argent, déjà. Mais de toute façon, pour l'instant, on n'a rien jamais reçu, là. Le moment est venu de mettre votre page en ligne. Ouais, mais je suis ready, là. Mets-la en ligne. Christ. Pourquoi ça fait. J'avais mis une photo de profil pis tout, pis ça l'a enlevé, genre, je comprends pas ça sert à quoi. Je sais vraiment pas pourquoi ils l'ont enlevé, je sens que j'avais mis une photo pis tout, j'avais mis le logo du podcast comme photo.
Nope. Des nope you, bro.
Ouais, ils étaient pas down pour ça, eux autres.
Got sent back to the Shadow Realm.
Publiez-le, comme pour toutes les nouvelles pages de carrière de nos présidents, à la vérification de votre page afin d'assurer que conforme à nos
On travaille sur
instructions.
YouTube, là. Tu vas pas pouvoir streamer aujourd'hui, là.
Nous mettons tout en œuvre pour réaliser cette opération au plus vite et nous enverrons un email lorsque votre page aura été approuvée.
That's it. Maintenant, t'attends. And now, we wait.
Ouais, maintenant, faut attendre. C'est le waiting game. Faut-tu que je remette les photos, genre, pourquoi c'est enlevé? C'est n'importe quoi. Au moins, j'ai la photo de profil puis le backdrop déjà de Ready, là.
Ouais, au moins. Des digital assets. Finalement, attends, c'était qui voulait faire le nouveau logo?
Mais j'avais parlé à Johan, parce que lui, il est en graphic design maintenant, là.
Puis on a-tu un ETA?
Ben, pour l'instant, faudrait lui dire qu'est-ce qu'on veut, là.
Ben, qu'est-ce qu'on veut?
Faudrait que je lui donne Ben, c'est ça, je sais pas encore, là.
Tu sais pas.
Faut figure out. Faut qu'on figure out quelque chose, là. Parce que le logo, il est pas mauvais, faut juste le pimp up un petit peu, là. Faut que je figure out une. Faut que je figure out ça, faut que j'y pense, là.
Juste une image de Vanunu Mordecai.
Ça serait bon, là. Je t'ai envoyé le lien du Patreon. T'arrives à l'ouvrir?
Ah, attendez-moi 2 minutes. Je suis en train de gosser avec mon plastique encore.
T'es encore en train de stream ou non?
Ouais, ouais. Je teste la chose proper.
Propa.
Proper.
Propa. Propa.
Ouais, t'es là.
Ajouter un titre. Ouais,
Philippe.
tu le vois?
C'est écrit Philippe.
De quoi c'est qu'il fait là?
Ouais, il écrit Philippe. Join October 2024.
C'est pas ça qui est censé être écrit.
Il n'y a rien écrit d'autre. C'est Air Illégal Podcast Creators, Philippe.
Moi, je vois quelque chose d'autre. Moi, je vois Air Illégal Podcast avec l'image puis tout, là.
Non, moi je vois pas d'image, je vois fuck all.
Mais peut-être qu'il faut que ça passe à travers l'acceptation
Ouais, ouais,
avant,
c'est
là, je
sûr,
sais
parce
pas.
qu'il faut que ça passe à l'acceptation pour que ça soit public. Mais en attendant, je vois ton nom pareil.
Ben, c'est ça. Ben, c'est pas grave, là. On va vivre avec. Ah, l'affaire, ça commence à avoir du sens, là. Bientôt, on va grow sur Patreon, on va faire du gros bling bling money, big money.
Le gars est déjà après le big money. Là.
Moi, je vois déjà les coins, là, en train de rentrer dans le Patreon, là.
Ouais, mais
Je
je sais pas
le vois déjà,
combien
notre
j'ai créé en
Patreon.
Patreon, mais. Tu me dis que ça va pas donner.
Moi, je le vois déjà, là. Notre Patreon, il va être rempli de coins.
Rempli de coins.
Je suis ready pour ça.
Tellement ready pour que Patreon prenne sa cote.
Mais finalement, t'as Discord ou t'as pas de Discord?
Finalement, j'ai pas Discord, mais je peux l'installer.
Ben là.
9ECHHT.
Faudrait que... Ah, Discord, c'est mieux, là.
Si je me connecte à mon Patreon, on va voir s'il est déjà accepté. Je pense qu'il est déjà là. Ah, the Trust and Safety Team unlaunched your page. Je me suis
Unlaunched?
unlaunched.
Le gars, il s'est fait unlaunch. Je savais même pas que c'était un mot. Le gars, il s'est fait unlaunch. T'as fait l'inverse d'un launch. Ça sonne drôle, pareil, là, mais c'est chiant.
Learn more.
C'est calme, là, c'est chiant, là. Pourquoi ils t'ont unlaunch?
We notice it's been a while since your creator's page last payment activity. For security reason, your page has been unlaunched. You can
Ouais,
edit
c'est
and
plus actif dessus.
relaunch your page at any time.
Ah, ben c'est chill. C'est juste que t'as pas été connecté depuis un bout et puis eux, ils s'inquiétaient. Ils étaient comme, ah, on va le unlaunch, on va le ramener sur Terre. Là.
Voilà, j'ai fait publish. Your page is ready, publish. Nice. Je suis dans la même waiting game que toi.
On est back in the game.
Your page is live. Haha, mine is live. Get Shrek. Tiens, je t'envoie le link. Allô? Oh, j'ai brisé. J'ai brisé.
really important dates that happened that are historical that I think like set this structure really intentionally. The first was 1909, the Flexner Report. So literally John D. Rockefeller's personal lawyer wrote the report for Congress that basically set the standard that's the standard today for medical education. And it literally says in the binding guidelines that holistic health and nutrition and anything about interconnectedness of the body is pseudoscience. It says we need to name the condition and cut it out or prescribe it.
And what year is this?
1909.
So they're still going by the recommendations of 1909.
We still follow the Flexner report.
A policy. I mean, and we could get
crazy.
to policies, but like rescinding the Flexner report and having updated scientific education and standard of care guidelines based on what we've learned since 1909 about the majesty of the interconnectedness of our body is a really good first start, because we're binded under a law, just demonstrably, just like, again, not conspiratorial. John D. Rockefeller's personal lawyer wrote this report. Why? Because John D. Rockefeller is the father of the pharmaceutical industry and created pharmaceuticals from byproducts of oil production, and was the first investor into Johns Hopkins and other major medical schools, University of Chicago, and started the modern education program for health. There were some big issues in the health, this was the Wild West, but he created Johns Hopkins and the standard of residency training as a way to silo diseases very intentionally and then prescribe his products and interventions as the top pharmaceutical maker. And the medical schools that he created were basically a distribution system to him. Okay, so you get to World War II. Up until World War II, around that time, the 1950s, 1960s, I would argue almost any medical miracle you can think of or any listener can think of was created before that time. You know, it's all acute situations, emergency surgical procedures, sanitation procedures, antibiotics to make an infection not deadly. Almost every medical miracle we can think of was something that was going to kill you right away, infectious disease. And then you take the pill or take the treatment for a finite period of time and you stop it, or do the surgery quickly and you're cured. Those are medical miracles. And we had a lot of good things happen up until World War II. Very intentionally, the medical industry saw the birth control pill in the late 1950s, 1960s. And the birth control pill was the first pill in world history that people took for longer than a couple weeks. It was the first pill ever that is like, oh, interesting. You can actually convince someone to take a pill for years, for almost most of their life. Recurring revenue. And there was a huge emphasis of the medical industry to take the trust engendered up until 1960. RFK talks about this. We didn't spend money on chronic disease management. All medicine was acute issues. Chronic disease, diabetes, obesity, that was outside the doctor's office. They saw that you could medicalize chronic conditions. Today, 90 to 95% of spending is on chronic conditions. So what do? In the 1970s, literally the Sackler family, their kids did the opioids. Their forebears created Valium. And 30% of women in the United States in the 1970s were on Valium. Time Magazine, Valium Nation, Mommy's Little Helper.
Yeah.
So we started creating all these psychiatric conditions. We started medicalizing heart disease. We started medicalizing all these type 2 diabetes, started creating academic research totally funded by the pharmaceutical industry, saying that type 2 diabetes isn't reversible, that it's basically genetic, heart disease, all these things, and started pilling them. Then what happened to food? Chronic disease wasn't that big of a deal in the 1970s, 1980s. You look at the graph of all chronic conditions, there's just a sharp turn in the 1980s. It's literally almost to the year of the Surgeon General report saying smoking wasn't great. So the second that report came out, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds were two of the largest companies in the world. It wasn't like Microsoft and Google on the top companies list. It was like cigarette companies. Dopamine is a really good thing to sell, which the tech companies do now. And they used their cash piles. And by 1990, the three largest M&A deals in American history, in world history, were cigarette companies buying food companies. So you had Nabisco bought by R.J. Reynolds, you had Kraft and U.S. Food and you see those graphs of all the food companies owned by like a couple companies. That was the cigarette companies. And they did two things very, very intentionally. They took over the institutions of trust to say ultra-processed food was healthy, and then they took their scientists and rigged the food itself to make it more addictive. Not to kill kids, but to make it more addictive. So you had the literal food pyramid, which said ultra-processed food is great, low-fat, carbs, base of the pyramid. That was constructed literally by the cigarette industry to promote their addictive products. And this weaponization of food, as I call it, it's not just like this conspiracy. Literally, the cigarette industry, those two companies, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, were the two largest food producers in the United States. Like 50% of American food were created by cigarette companies in the 1990s. And they have got us addicted and weaponized this food, and all chronic conditions have just shot up. It's because that ultra-processed foods, literally, by tobacco industry scientists, hijacks our evolutionary biology. Again, you can't overeat grass-fed steak, but these food, with scientists much smarter than any of us, that's what they're doing. They're shutting off our satiety signals. The byproduct of this cheap, addictive food, which we don't even have research for yet, is that it's sprayed with all these chemicals. It's sprayed with 10,000 chemicals that are allowed in the United States when only 400 are allowed in Europe. All these chemicals to make the food addictive, to make the food cheap, to do the monocropping. And that food is absolutely, and we don't need to wait for the research on this, these chemicals, these neurotoxins are destroying our cells, destroying our microbiome in ways we don't fully understand. So I just want to make clear to everyone, this has happened very intentionally. And it can be undone pretty quickly too, but we have to realize this isn't a conspiracy. It's true corruption that happened deliberately.
I would just add a few more dates. I think one thing about the research, we're one of the only countries in the world where the burden of proof for harm, we allow these chemicals to just enter our food system. We have 10,000 chemicals in our food system. Europe, only 400, because they have to show that it's safe before they use it. We're allowed to use it, and then only if there's issues that crop up do people have to do research. So, there's this ridiculous GRAS, generally recognized as safe designation, which is essentially a company self-assesses whether the chemical that they are creating is generally recognized as safe. No one's overseeing it. And Brigham talks about this, compassion for the FDA. They're overwhelmed. There's a lot of stuff to do. It's kind of like a hoarder's house. Where do we even start? I don't necessarily know if I buy that. I think that it's pretty bad and bought off that we have all these chemicals. But they basically just have to self-designate if it's generally recognized as safe, and then it can go into our food system. One thing that I find really interesting is that I really reflect on a lot is what is the difference between a food chemical and a drug? They're all just synthetic molecules that are made in factories, in labs by scientists. Do you know what the difference is? Intended use. So basically, if the intended use is for food, you can synthesize almost anything you want and put it in food. We are being mass drugged and poisoned in our food system with 10,000 virtually unregulated chemicals, which have bought off papers saying that they are safe. I mean, you look at what happened with all the Monsanto litigation about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They had to release this whole thing called the Monsanto papers. They were declassified, where they ghost wrote scientific papers saying that glyphosate is safe. So there's all this corruption in there where basically we have 10,000 unregulated chemicals in our food system and we're getting sick as hell, obviously. And then you've got the evidence-based people saying, well, we need to have a 10-year longitudinal study to show that glyphosate is causing XYZ disease. And it's obviously that's not the right approach, because first of all, it is the synergistic combination of all the toxins that are now in our environment that are leading to all these pleiotropic health issues. That's very hard to study. So we have to get our heads out of our ass and use our common sense and realize what's going on, and not wait 10 years with these, NIH-funded studies that are going to be corrupted. And, I think, so that's just one thing about the food chemicals. I just wanted to add to your point, Cal, some other dates, you look at the processed food emergence. Processed food really didn't start taking off until these mergers. There was a little bit of a start of it. Ultra processed foods did not exist before World War II. We needed to have shelf stable food for soldiers and things like that we could ship, and so there were maybe some good intentions there. But then there was an opportunity there that got seen, and we can also weaponize the feminist movement against being in the kitchen, you're a slave. You don't, that your value's outside the home. You need to climb the corporate ladder. Here, have this convenience food that we basically made for soldiers, and we're going to tell you that this is actually your liberation. So of course we got people not cooking. Families aren't eating together anymore. Kids are eating 67% of children's calories now are ultra processed foods. These means foods that come from a factory made by food scientists, not just processed, ultra processed. The highest form of processing, 67% of calories. Then you go to the 1970s, and we have the advent of high fructose corn syrup, which, as Callie talks about, this preceded some of the mergers. But high fructose corn syrup is a weapon of mass destruction that basically food scientists used an understanding about hibernating animals like bears who fructose is one of the only types of calories where instead of making you feel satiated, it makes you more hungry. And this is evolutionarily, and we knew this. In the fall, when animals are preparing for hibernation and they start eating fructose-rich berries, they need to put on a ton of fat for winter. And so there's a feed-forward mechanism with fructose where it actually gets the bears to be hungry and even violent to outcompete other animals to get as many berries as possible in a short period of time to lay 3D print fat for winter. So you have the scientists understanding this and say, hey, we can make liquid fructose 1,000 times more potent than the fructose you'd find in berries. Same molecule, but in higher concentration. And we can add it to everything. We can add it to salad dressing. We're going to add it to ketchup. We're going to add it to children's school lunches. We're going to add it, obviously, to sodas. And we're going to make people insatiable. We're going to make their bodies and their brains think that they're preparing for winter that's never coming. And there has been research that shows that high fructose corn syrup is associated with violence, ADHD in kids, all of these different things. Just last thing I'll mention, flash forward 1986, I think another very important date, which is the date when the litigation went through that said we couldn't sue vaccine manufacturers. And the Vaccine Safety Act, that's a very important date in the whole history because it is one of the first times where we were able to pass legislation through Congress that said that pharmaceutical companies could not be sued for wrongdoing. And that still is present today. They basically put together a paltry little fund that people could apply to get no fault reimbursements for vaccine harm, but you cannot sue the company. So you start to get companies being legally immune from wrongdoing, which has then accelerated. And they're now starting to try and push things like that for pesticides as well. So that's just some of the history of like why we are where we are today. It's not rocket science. This has all been very institutionalized and structured. And it's the last 50 years. Like we can undo all of this with leadership. And so that's just a little bit of the picture of how we are where we are today.
Can I just say one thing about the fructose corn syrup? I'm so glad you brought that up because I didn't know that there was a unique way that it makes it more addictive and kills your satiety.
Oh, yeah.
Or increases it, or kills it rather. Because I'd always thought that sugar was sugar. And this is one of the arguments that a lot of people that are poo-pooing all this stuff, like, oh, this is nonsense, sugar is sugar.
Yeah.
Like, there's no difference between the sugar in high fructose corn syrup versus the sugar in an apple.
No, it's really interesting.
Voilà, amigo.
Salut!
Eh, dis donc, on est au Saint-Vincent et on a quelqu'un qui a un 5 cents de 1947 et il voudrait savoir combien ça vaut.
Sa question, c'est en termes de rareté ou en termes de métal?
En termes de s'il veut le vendre, à combien est-ce qu'il est dans les bons prix puis à combien il se fait baiser?
Je sais pas. S'il vend ça à $1, il a fait une affaire.
Combien?
1 piastre.
Oh merde. Putain, on pensait que c'était plus. Une pièce.
C'est rien de rare.
Ok, on va rester sur la première. Est-ce qu'il était en mode 10 pièces?
Non, l'année plus rare, là, ça serait 1925. 1925,
Ok.
il y en a pour 100 piastres à peu près. 1925. Mais
Ok, t'as besoin d'en trouver un de 1925 en fait.
100 piastres, ouais.
Mais 1925, t'es à 100 piastres. En commençant déjà. Bon. Tu viens boire une bière, on est au Saint-Vincent.
Non, mais moi, c'est ça, je suis à Drummondville.
Ouh, tu t'es installé à Drummondville ou quoi? À chaque fois que je t'appelle, tu es là-bas.
à Montréal.
Ah, t'es plus à Montréal? Ah, ouais.
Non, faut que tu viennes à Drummondville.
Bro, t'as déménagé.
Ouais.
D'accord, c'est pas grave. Ok. Bon, on viendra te voir à Drummondville, écoute.
Ben, vous pouvez venir quand vous voulez, on va faire un party d'Halloween.
Comme si on venait le lundi,
Lundi
dimanche ou lundi, dimanche ou lundi.
Ouais, ça le fait.
Ouais? Ok, check bien ça. On s'organise.
Cool. Bon, salut.
Ok. On peut dormir chez toi?
Ben oui, bien sûr.
Ok. Écoute, moi je suis en vacances jusqu'au 18, hein. Donc
Ah,
on se
sympa.
tient au jus pour lundi.
Cool.
À plus, ma poule.
À plus. Salut.
And there's two amazing books on this. Richard Johnson from University of Colorado wrote Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, and then David Perlmutter wrote Drop Acid. Both books are about a molecule called uric acid, which is unique to fructose metabolism. So when fructose is metabolized in the body, not like glucose, it creates uric acid, which creates oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain and the body that if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you're not going to be able to process sugars to energy, mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. So you break the mitochondria with the excess fructose overloading the mitochondria with uric acid. And then what happens? You can't turn sugars to energy. So what do? You turn sugars to fat. So you start 3D printing fat because you break the mitochondria with excess fructose. And on top of that, the mitochondrial dysfunction and oxidative stress when happening in the brain is what may inspire the violence and the ADHD and all that stuff to make the bears manic so they get as much berries as possible. This is what's happening in every kid in every classroom in America now. And so that's kind of some of the biology very simply about what's happening with fructose.
So the apple is probably a bad example, but like cane sugar. Is cane sugar fructose based?
Well, it's generally is going to have sucrose, which is going to have some amount of glucose and fructose. But this is the thing about fruit, is that we have 40 trillion cells, and we have the ability to clear uric acid, and we have the ability to process fructose in a physiologic amount. We're never going to have the uric acid increasing and overloading the mitochondria if we're eating an apple. It's when you're eating 20, 30 times the fructose that an apple has, and you're literally pouring it down, that all of a sudden, imagine you get this huge rise in uric acid in the body and other things that are happening. And that's when it overwhelms. So it's a bit of that dose makes the poison, because our body has the ability to excrete toxins. Our body has the ability to deal with some heavy metals. Our body has the ability to probably clear some level of glyphosate, but we can't clear all of it all the time, 24 hours a day, in 100 times the quantity of all these things together. And the research and the evidence-based thing and this cult of the science, they love to ignore that. The idea of synergistic effects, of this overwhelming breaking of our cellular resources, is just conveniently forgotten because we study things in isolation. That's literally the definition of how a double-blind, placebo-controlled study happens. It's one variable, and one thing that you're testing.
You can't do it on food.
That doesn't make sense. We live in a toxic stew.
The only answer of double-blind placebo-controlled studies, which every guest comes on is just like, that's just the gold standard. That's just, everyone just accepts that that's what you need. A double-blind placebo-controlled study, the only answer is a pill, essentially. You can't test psychedelics on that way. You can't test food. You can't test exercise. You can't blind those things. So anything that actually recognizes the unison and the interconnectivity of why we're getting sick can't be studied through a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. You actually have the FDA that's basically created. You saw this with the recent MDMA decision. It's basically rigged that the only thing that can be approved through the top way we study things and approve drugs is a synthetic pill. That's the only thing that it can basically lead to through a double-blind, placebo-controlled study.
It's like with vaccines. It's like, yeah, I bet that one vaccine probably isn't causing autism. But what about the 20 that they're getting before 18 months? Like, we don't look at it in synergistic, and so that's a big problem. And this is where the cult of the science, and I say the science specifically because science is beautiful. Using the scientific method and using that way of inquiry into the natural world is a beautiful art. But weaponizing papers that are often bought for or corrupted, and the leaders of some of our key medical journals have actually even said that 50% of scientific research that published ends up being wrong. So it's bought for, corrupted, or wrong. We rely on this, and one interesting trend that we're seeing in our world is that if we do choose to put dots together or use our intuition, our God-given intuition, anything other than this particular way of examining things, you are dangerous. You are dangerous. And I think that that's something we need to really question. I think, especially as a woman, and I'm thinking about having kids soon, I'm thinking about wow, I have the ability in my body to build a human, 3D print a human, pull in a soul to that human. I don't need a peer-reviewed study or a textbook to tell me how to do that. Our body and our intuition and our minds and the subtle things happening inside us are important. They are incredible. We have now been told that you can't trust it and you are dangerous if you do that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think parents are very frustrated right now, is because parenting, I'm not a parent yet, but Callie is, but when we're being told now that parents are the enemy for using their own judgment about their families and kids, I think that's probably, it's deeply frustrating to people. And that's basically what we're being asked to do. So, yeah.
I want to talk about Alzheimer's. That was the other thing that I wanted to talk about when we talked about early puberty. You mentioned the escalating risks of Alzheimer's. When did Alzheimer's become a thing? Because I was reading this article that was saying that it was before the advent of seed oils. You very, very, very rarely saw it, if at all.
No, it's been exploding like every single other chronic condition. I'll just quickly go to, it ties to Casey's point she just made. This year in 2024 is the highest rate in American history of Alzheimer's, cancer, autoimmune conditions, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, kidney disease, autism. Every single chronic disease you can think of is at an all-time high, growing at an increasing rate as we spend more money to treat those conditions. So I think one point we're trying to make.
Nicorette Vapo Éclair commence à agir sur les envies de nicotine en 30 secondes. Avec la volonté, on peut faire des choses extraordinaires. Mais parfois, on a besoin d'un petit coup de pouce. Donnez plus de pouvoir à votre vouloir.
Un autre accident de voiture.
Mais Siri, je l'ai choisi.
Est-ce que c'est vous, la Sylvie?
La vraie question, c'est toi, as-tu du neuf? Bienvenue à Saint-Vincent.
Je vais m'y plonger, m'y projeter.
Je suis la plus grande criminelle de l'histoire du Québec.
Je veux les attraper.
Ils veulent nous placer en résidence.
Résidence.
Stop! Faut vraiment arrêter ça. Tic-tac, tic-tac, tic-tac. Qu'est-ce que tu fais, moi? Ben, je me déterre, qu'est-ce que tu penses?
Je veux les vivre.
Vis ta vie, puis laisse-moi vivre la mienne, OK?
On va vivre la mienne. Et les revivre.
Le temps passe.
Moi aussi, je vous aime.
Je veux prendre le temps.
Ça fait combien de temps qu'on s'est pas vu? On n'a rien qu'une vie à vivre, et pour ça, je vous dis merci.
YOLO! Je t'aime vraiment.
Les meilleures fictions sont sur icitout.tv. Gratuit et encore meilleur avec l'Extra.
Is that, all the NIH, all the FDA, it's all on accepting that trend as a given. It's totally washed their hands of it. And how do we find marginal pills to make this a little bit better, not asking why? And that question about Alzheimer's, the point we're trying to make is that when it comes to chronic conditions, which Alzheimer's is, you have to really not ask the Alzheimer's question. You have to ask why that's one branch on this tree, obesity, right? This tree. And we talk about, and I think Casey has this amazing framework, you can literally look at 5 biomarkers, the biomarkers of metabolic dysfunction: HDL, triglycerides, blood sugar, blood pressure, and your waistline. And I'm not joking, I'm not being hyperbolic. If we fired every single researcher and canceled every single grant in the US government for all chronic disease research and all nutrition research and created all policy to maximize those 5 biomarkers in America, you by definition don't have type 2 diabetes. You almost have a 0% chance of getting heart disease. You have very close to 0% chance of getting Alzheimer's. You are not obese by definition. Literally, you go down every single chronic condition that is torturing American life. If you're diabetic, you're 4 times more likely to be depressed or suicidal because there are cells in our head, and diabetes is cellular dysregulation. So like literally, I'm not like on the research and the science thing. I think there's great heroes who've been, getting into the weeds on the research, but chronic disease is interconnected to basic lifestyle factors. I think this is a political issue, honestly. Every American needs to ask, is this an incremental issue where we need slightly better pharmaceutical interventions and slightly better research, or is this a radical shift of understanding how our bodies are interconnected and understanding that needs to be a shift in medicine and, frankly, how we view the environment? Like, that is a question that we actually think is relatively urgent and relatively existential. Modern society is amazing, but as Casey said, this is dark right now. Like, if you believe what Casey's saying about these statistics about chronic disease, and you actually look at the math that we're growing 2 times with healthcare spending the rate of GDP, it's the largest and fastest growing industry in the country. The fastest growing industry in the United States is not AI. It's not tech. It's healthcare. And as it grows, we get sicker, fatter, more depressed, more infertile. It is going to bankrupt the country, and it's not slowing down. So if you actually believe we need a new paradigm, is it about getting better research, or is it about actually saying the research is wrong? This whole paradigm of seeing chronic disease in silos is wrong. So I'm sure you can talk more about Alzheimer's, but it's interconnected.
Yeah, no, I think the point about incrementalism versus radical is the question we need to be asking ourselves. Like, we're not, And so in terms of Alzheimer's, so I think a really interesting framing is that the brain, it's only 2% of our body weight, but it uses 20% of our body's energy. And there's been this theory with Alzheimer's of like, oh, it's the plaques in the brain. It's the tau and the tangles and the beta amyloid and all these things. And so we thought, okay, well, if we can get rid of those with a drug, like maybe it'll improve. But no Alzheimer's drugs really work meaningfully. And more recently, there's just been this understanding of like, okay, metabolic dysfunction is definitely going up. We know metabolic syndrome and diabetes are going up, and the brain uses 20% of the body's energy. And something that's happening in the body, like diabetes, is also happening in the brain. There's been this interesting, Chris Palmer talks about this in such an amazing way in his book, Brain Energy, but like we've somehow decided to separate the brain from the body as if they're different things, when in fact, they're all just made of cells. They're all just made of cells that do the same things. They need to do metabolism to keep the cell working. So we've got this organ that uses 20% of our energy, and we've got 50% of Americans with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, which is fundamentally a metabolic issue. And of course, the brain's basically underpowered. It's not getting the energy it needs, and that's going to express itself as dementia. So it's been increasing in parallel with everything that's happening with our increasing diabetes rates. And then the early onset dementia and Alzheimer's disease, that has tripled since 2013. So younger people, and that makes sense though. We've got 30% of teens now with prediabetes. That was like 0% in the past. You didn't have kids with the adult onset diabetes in the past. And so you've got now 30% of teens with prediabetes. You've got middle-aged people now, 50% with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. Of course, that's also creating an energetic deficit. So this neurometabolic, neuroenergetic theory of Alzheimer's, maybe with these cells crying out for help, maybe some of these plaques that we're seeing are actually a protective mechanism. The brain actually laying down almost like protective shielding. It's a response to an underlying metabolic issue as opposed to the problem itself. But of course, in our paradigm, we're like, we just got to get rid of that symptom of the problem. When in fact, actually, if we could unencumber the brain to be able to make energy properly, make good energy properly, that's why our book is called Good Energy, they would actually be able to energize, to heal itself and to have the power to do its work, which is cognitive thinking. I was just going to say, an amazing book about Alzheimer's that just hasn't gotten as much attention as I think it should is Dale Bredesen's book, The End of Alzheimer's, because he talks about, when you really look at the research, there are about 36 different biomarkers and factors. I think he calls them like the 36 holes in the roof of what creates, like if it's raining and you plug one hole, your house is still going to be filled with water. You have to plug all 36 holes to prevent or reverse Alzheimer's disease. And of course, all of these are related in some way to metabolic health, but it's things like your vitamin D levels, your insulin levels, the amount of movement you're getting, vitamin D, insulin, B12, other things like that. These things that we know are part and parcel with metabolic health. So, and there was an amazing Lancet paper from a couple years ago that showed that if we just got on top of some of the basic modifiable factors of our metabolic health, we could slash Alzheimer's rates from happening. So, I think, fundamentally, it's one more branch on the tree that is rooted in this metabolic dysfunction in our body, which is fundamentally rooted in three processes that uniquely really hurt the brain, which is oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and chronic inflammation. These are the three hallmarks of metabolic dysfunction. And the brain is so sensitive and such a complex, high processing power organ that these core cellular disturbances that make up metabolic dysfunction, which are caused by our environment, and cannot really be addressed. With drugs, mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, they're showing up so prominently in the brain.
I'll just say, there's kind of just a question with all we're hearing about these diseases is the reason Alzheimer's is skyrocketing because we don't have enough research and don't have enough drugs? Is the reason obesity rates are skyrocketing among kids because we don't have enough drugs or not enough research? That's the argument that's being given to us. We literally being told, right, after the lessons of COVID, which the COVID lockdowns and what the pharmaceutical industry did with their co-option of our government with COVID was the most significant public policy mistake in American history, at least since World War II. In modern times, I think we can all agree on. We are still saying, and it's just people, I think, because we trust the medical system still so much, we are literally thinking societally that the fact that there's an obesity crisis among 6-year-olds is a drug deficiency issue. Like it's a dark, I think, blind spot in our culture right now.
The reason why I brought up Alzheimer's is a couple of reasons. One, the amyloid plaque research, wasn't that proven to be flawed, like deeply and maybe even corrupt? And then there was another, there's something that came out very recently. See if you can find this, Jamie. I think Jay Bhattacharya might have tweeted it.
You were talking about this with Max Lugavere.
Yeah. Oh, Max Lugavere.
Yeah.
He tweeted
but Dr.
it.
J's great.
Yeah. So that there was...
We bought a ham.
An 18-pound jamon iberico.
Ooh, I'll whip up some of my famous sangria.
Perhaps we could also pair our delicacy with some cotton candy and Rice Krispie treats.
But I don't know what to do with those tossed salads and scrambled eggs.
Like rampant corruption.
Oh, yeah.
And
this is coming out every day. We're hearing about a new premier researcher who's published, hundreds of papers in their field who, like, literally are, Western blots are one of these things you see in scientific papers, like that basically show you protein levels, like copied and pasted Western blots in like papers across their career, like just made up data that then has served as foundational dogma for future research. So you think about the ripple effect.
SSRIs too.
Yeah.
There's a big one.
And so it really gets back to the core problem that's above all the problems, which is an incentive problem. Like, it's a simple economic incentive problem that's basically causing all these problems. And I think it's that what we're striving for in this country is ultimately economic growth and value. That is what we care about. And so, in each industry, you see people fighting for that, including at the NIH, including researchers. We're all motivated by this carrot that is destroying us. It's very, very dark because,
Jamie, see if we can find that Max Lugavere.
Twitter wasn't working. It's not.
Twitter's off.
Twitter's down.
The Russians.
It's coming up now. Here you go.
Max Lugavere posted it on Instagram as well.
Yeah, Max, man.
Over 100 NIH-funded Alzheimer's and Parkinson's research papers contain completely made-up data, according to new allegations. Billions in funding and years of research now in serious doubt.
Yeah.
So with Max, actually, with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, with Marty McCary, Chris Palmer, a number of voices, we're engaging members of Congress. We're talking, to helping whatever we can with RFK and Trump's leadership on this. But I had a somewhat out-of-body experience that kind of hits on what you're getting at. I was sitting across from the member of Congress, and I think it's the exact same issue on obesity, who introduced this Treat and Reduce Obesity Act. It has 150 co-sponsors, and it's to jam government-funded Ozempic. So it starts with Medicare. 80% of people on Medicare, old people, are obese or overweight. So the second this bill is signed, you have open season on all people on Medicare. And then the second something's approved for Medicare, it always goes to Medicaid for lower income people, because why would an old person be eligible for something but not a poor person in the United States? So that immediately goes to Medicaid. That's the game. And then Medicaid, right, it's 6 years old. It's now being pushed for on 6-year-olds. So the second this bill is signed, $1,600 per patient per month, taxpayer money, which is why Novo Nordisk is the 9th most valuable company in the world right now, this Danish company expecting 90% of their profits from the United States on expectation of this bill's passage. So we're sitting across from him. And I bring these things up. And I bring up a simple question of, why is this one-size-fits-all jamming Ozempic into the average American's arm instead of opening up flexibility to potentially explore regenerative food or exercise or incentivizing those things? Like, it's not even fully anti-drug, but why is this what clinician said this is the cure? Like, this is the one cure, because it's not opening up any money for food or exercise or any other modality that could actually cure the root cause of obesity. And he looked at me fully like serious and said, I'd never thought of that. And I told them that it's being pushed on kids and that there's an aggressive effort where Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford, the top obesity researcher at Harvard, was funded significantly by Novo Nordisk and millions of dollars in research grants and went on 60 Minutes, where the top funder of 60 Minutes is pharmaceutical companies, and said obesity is a brain disease and a genetic. She said that, top Harvard researcher. And she said it needs to be aggressively intervened for kids. And I said there's open season on kids. The guy who introduced the bill, he said, that's not true. I'm going to put in the bill that kids can't use it. I'm like, you'd be going against the FDA guidance on that. You can't do that. I go, you understand, based on the JP Morgan estimates, where they literally presented the estimates of increasing obesity rates at the JP Morgan conference in San Francisco. And all the investors clapped like seals, standing ovation, as they presented a chart on rising obesity rates, showing that as Ozempic increases in prescription rates, obesity in the United States will increase. Unpack that one for me. They show that graph and everyone claps because it's a lifetime drug, because it's a crash diet. It's liquid anorexia. It makes you not want to eat. Crash diets don't work, right? And of course, more than 50% of the people that even have insurance funding for it go off of it within 6 months because it's the highest rate of side effects of any mass drug prescribed in American history. But he didn't know all that. And he looked at me in the eye, the person who introduced this bill that is going to be one of the most expensive bills in American history, the market cap of the 9th most valuable company, the most valuable company in Europe. They passed LVMH, the fashion company. The most valuable company in Europe rests on this bill. This is the guy that ostensibly wrote it. He said, no, it's a short-term solve. Ozempic's a short-term solve. Look at me right in the eyes. I'm like, no. It literally says there's metabolic issues and it warns somebody going off the drug. It says you have to take it for life. That's what he did not know that. It wasn't like the corruption is you have.
Lorsque l'envie de fumer vous prend, les pastilles Nicorette soulagent rapidement les envies de fumer, preuve clinique à l'appui. En plus d'offrir une explosion de saveurs. Vous avez jusqu'à 2 fois plus de chances de cesser de fumer avec Nicorette.
Dans la construction, il y a des incontournables, comme se lever tôt, boire un bon café, se protéger, travailler en équipe, prendre soin de ses outils, manger, travailler avec précision, prendre une pause, bien faire les choses, décompresser et surtout se perfectionner. Fier et compétent, un incontournable pour enrichir ses connaissances, pour développer son savoir-faire.
Brad Winstrup, if somebody wants to do something, if we want to change the world, email members of Congress, email Brad Winstrup, call his office and say, we think before we jab 6-year-olds with Ozempic, we should fix our food system. This thought literally didn't occur to him. So what's happening with this corruption, what's happening with obesity, with Alzheimer's, is the corruption is like, it doesn't even get to people even understanding it. The boiling frog, it's just obviously we're just going to find a drug, not ask why people are getting Alzheimer's. Obviously we're just going to jam 6-year-olds with Ozempic and not ask why people are getting obese. And then I literally get talking points in the room as he starts thinking about it. Oh, it's hard. Dietary interventions are hard. It's like, what's happening now is hard. Like going to a playground with my 2-year-old son and seeing every kid clearly having issues, clearly dealing with obesity, like 6 years old, seeing processed food all over the playground. Like that, like what's happening now, poisoning our cells en masse is pretty hard. So there are simple ways to do this. If Dr. Fauci in 2020 said COVID has strong metabolic links and we need to harden up our immune system, it's a problem. We're dying 3 times at a higher rate than the Japanese per capita. That's 16% of all COVID deaths are in the US and we're like 4% of the population. Like this is a warning sign for our immune system. We need to shift the healthcare budget to getting fit, to incentivizing exercise, to fixing and talking to Will Harris and other regenerative farmers and consulting them on how to transform our food system, seeing that the medical system has co-opted what drugs are and what medicine is. Like it's nothing short of a moral blind spot that food and exercise aren't seen truly as drugs, that they aren't seen as interventions from the $4.5 trillion we spend on medical systems. They do that in Europe. The Italians are 3 times less obese and diabetic than us. I don't think the Italians are more vigorous. I don't think Americans are lazier than Italians. Like there's something systemic happening where they spend 3 times less per capita on healthcare and 2 times more per capita on food.
And they're living 8 years longer.
8 years longer.
Well, and everybody notices it when you go over there and eat.
Yeah.
You
feel good.
You feel good.
Eat that pizza.
Yeah.
It's like the only place in the world I can eat gluten because it doesn't destroy my gut. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and it's weird that all these things that you say are so clear and they make so much sense.
Yeah.
It just
and
doesn't
yet
occur.
they're being ignored. Well, it speaks to capture.
Yeah.
Industry capture.
I met with Nancy Pelosi 2 weeks ago. look to her in the eyes because, we've been helping RFK, helping Trump, and we should talk about that. I think there's a really, really important societal dynamic happening with that unison. But I'm preparing as much as I can to foster this bipartisan conversation. I can tell you, everyone in the room, right, is horrified by these statistics. But every time their staffers are slithering behind them. And the healthcare staffers in Congress are waiting for their next job with the pharma industry or the insurance industry, and they really drive the place and make the bills. But a real problem with the corruption is these people making policies, literally chairs of healthcare committees. The simple ideas you're talking about and we're trying to express on metabolic health, on this simplicity really of why we're getting sick, it's not being like corruption is like leading them to deny it. It's like they just do not understand. Like these meetings we're doing with, and this hearing we did with Max and Brigham and others, Jillian Michaels and so many great people. It literally was giving these ideas to these members of Congress for the first time. There'll be a lot more on this, but it's so simple, but literally letting your lawmakers know. I hear two things again and again from meeting with over 40 members of Congress. It's like, I don't understand this, I don't know this, and my phone's not ringing off the hook. If I go against pharma, they're getting all the old people to call and say, don't kill me. Like to me, this issue, why this issue is becoming so resonant is because we're all feeling it. I think it's actually, we're hitting on the most important issue in the country. I think it's why everyone's flocking to books on this issue, why podcasts, why your podcast is the number one podcast. I mean, I consider I've learned more about metabolic health and healthcare listening to guests on your show than I think Casey's probably learned at Stanford Med School. So it's like people left to their own devices are flocking to this, and we need to make a statement with our politics. This is unfortunately a political issue.
So you were one of the people that helped sort of broker the deal with RFK and Trump and bring the two of those together. Tell me how that got started. Tell me how that worked out.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about that story, I literally think about 2021, our mom abruptly dying of pancreatic cancer. She was taking a hike, got a pain in her stomach, got a text the next day after getting a scan saying she has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We rushed to her side. She died 12 days later, just totally surprisingly. And Casey and I, on her gravesite, literally hugged each other and said, we want to write a book and we want to make this and evangelize this, inspired by you and others. We want to evangelize this and add the chorus to prevent what's happening, because so many Americans are on this pharmaceutical treadmill, and then the cancer is random. It's not random. Like all these warning signs that were missed with my mom, her prediabetes, her high cholesterol, her high blood pressure, those were pilled, not seen as gifts to get to the root cause, and then she was chopped down by cancer. This is happening to everyone. So we want to evangelize that. And we've been on the path as best we can with companies